let's go ahead and get started. All right, so hi all, welcome to O3's accessibility webinar alongside our friends at Acquia. Today we'll be talking about accessibility solutions for regulated industries. We're excited to have you all here on this power hour today. O3 deeply values accessibility for all, not just because it's the right thing for your customers, but it also can be an asset for your business, not only by reducing legal risk, but creating a more equitable experience for everyone. We're proud to be presenting alongside a company that also shares these values. So let's go through the agenda that we have. So here's an overview for our flow for the conversation today. And as a quick note, we really encourage you to share your questions and thoughts in the chat. We're really excited to hear from you, and we'll open up the floor following Brian and Allison's presentation. As a quick note, housekeeping note, we'll share this recording following the webinar. And feel free to pass this webinar link along to any colleagues you might see fit. So let's learn a little bit about who O3 is. So before we dive into things here, I want to provide a little background as to who O3 is and what we do. So O3 is a CX consultancy. We specialize in strategy, experience design, and technology solutions for any and all digital touchpoints across your customer's journey. So that could be anything from a web and mobile application to an employee or client portal, to an application or product. Today, it's estimated that companies without accessible sites are losing $6.9 billion a year to competitors whose sites are accessible. However, despite the growing number of accessibility lawsuits, many businesses have been slow to adopt an accessibility strategy. O3 is a leading consultancy in the accessibility space and has a team of certified experts who create and improve experiences to consider and account for all users. We've transformed and improved accessibility capabilities for countless brands. So let's learn a little bit about Brian here. So Brian is O3's leading accessibility expert. Brian has been a major contributor to our core clients, including Vertex, the Institutes, SEI, and many more over the years. He's been a resident accessibility advocate and continually pushes our engineering team to up the standards of code that we create. He's been one of the driving forces of O3's accessibility expertise, ensuring we are a leading consultancy to stay ahead of the curve in the accessibility space. Let's learn a little bit about Acquia. So we're joined by our technology partner, Acquia, as I mentioned. Acquia empowers the world's most ambitious brands to create digital customer experiences that matter. With open source Drupal at its core, the Acquia Digital Experience Platform, DXP, enables marketers, developers, and IT operations teams at thousands of global organizations to rapidly compose and deploy digital products and services that engage customers, enhance conversions, and help businesses stand out. So let's meet Allison. We are joined by Allison Vogel, who is a senior user experience designer and leader of Acquia's cross-functional accessibility focus group. Aimed at unifying Acquia's accessibility strategy, the group focuses on achieving accessible standards across products, marketing materials, internal tools, and communications. Within the UX team, Allison serves as an advocate for accessibility testing and reporting. Her work has paved the way for benchmarking Acquia's products and reaching new levels of inclusive design. Welcome, Allison. We're excited to have you here, and I'm going to hand it over to both of you from here.
Thanks, Maddie. So for me personally, what does accessibility mean and how did I get involved? In a previous professional life, I was an architect. I'm sure many are aware of the strict regulations that are in place to make our physical environments accessible to all. Now, as a user experience designer, I strive to do the same for our digital environments. I myself have a cognitive disability that is often overlooked when designing digital interfaces, so I view myself not only as a designer, but as an advocate for better design standards that increase usability for all users, regardless of physical or cognitive abilities. And so a little bit more about Acquia. Since its inception in 2007, Acquia has evolved from a Drupal hosting provider to a leader in enabling global brands to deliver unified digital experiences. So in addition to 1 in 4 Fortune 100 companies who are Acquia customers, we serve 10% of the Fortune 500. More importantly, when it comes to the topic of accessibility, we serve a wide range of customers in highly regulated industries. So that includes education, healthcare, and government, among others. I'll go into more detail on some of these later. After creating Drupal, an open source CMS framework, our founder and current CTO, Dries, started a cloud hosting service that has evolved into Acquia's digital experience platform, also called a DXP. It's the only open DXP on the market today. So Acquia has been leading the platform, is the leading platform contributor to Drupal since it was started. We have a dedicated team at Acquia that is 100% devoted to contributing to Drupal's core development. So such significant contribution to this core gives us a lot of influence on accessibility across the platform and the Drupal community as a whole. Here are a few facts highlighting kind of the power of that open source community. Acquia has a profound impact on the health and vitality of the platform, its capabilities, security, accessibility, and overall growth of users on the Drupal platform. So here's how we stack up against some of our competitors, according to some third-party reviewers. On the right side, we have Acquia in the overall DXP market. On the left, we're showing Widen, which is our recently acquired digital asset management tool. In later slides, I'll go into more detail about how Acquia's products and services relate back to this, building accessible experiences for these regulated industries. And with that, I'll hand it over to Brian to dig into some of the accessibility content.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that awesome introduction, Allison and Maddie. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be tuning in from. We're very excited to go through and share with you about accessibility and what we believe is the positive impact that prioritizing accessibility can have on your business, particularly as it pertains to regulated sectors such as education, healthcare, and government. So diving right in, what do we mean when we actually say web accessibility? The internet was originally designed to work for devices and people of all kinds of abilities. As designers and developers, we often go through and break some of that natural support, unfortunately, in our pursuit of providing kind of like evolving designs, customized designs, and functionality. Web accessibility best practices put an emphasis on the accommodations that make web pages usable for those with disabilities. And that's not the complete story with everything, though. Many of these considerations that are actually critical for individuals with disabilities simultaneously improve the overall user experience for everybody. And we'll dig into that over the course of this presentation between Allison and myself. First, let's review a couple statistics that I think might help reinforce why accessibility is such an important business consideration. So 25% of individuals around the world actually have some form of disability. In the United States, that actually translates to about 61 million individuals with disabilities. And when you compare that to some of the requests that we get for digital products and websites where we may need to go through and support legacy browsers, legacy devices, that 61 million number like far outweighs any of these kind of fringe technologies, fringe devices and everything that we're typically asked to go through and invest time and energy into. In fact, those 61 million individuals is generally larger than most of the minorities in the United States. So we are talking about a very significant group of individuals. 30% of working people actually have some form of disability. And this number shows that a large portion of people that are potentially your coworkers, they could be your clients, may have some type of disability. And this is particularly significant because as the population ages, as you age, as people around you age, many who don't currently exhibit any type of disability can start to experience new disabilities over time. Now, looking at this stat, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I haven't noticed anybody around me with any disabilities. And there's actually a good reason for that. And that's because 75% of disabilities are not readily identifiable simply by looking at a person. Disabilities like this can actually include low vision, color blindness, hearing, or cognitive disabilities, just to name a few. Now, these stats that I've kind of listed out here so far can be impactful on their own, but I think when you look at the business impact, it's even more telling. 71% of individuals with disabilities will abandon a website that's difficult to use. Now, obviously, abandoning a website immediately affects a person's perception of the company because obviously their accommodations are being accounted for as able-bodied individuals. But this lack of accommodation kind of increases the time and effort and puts an undue burden on the individual with disabilities because it is now on them to find an alternate means to address their needs. The need hasn't gone away, and particularly in some of these regulated industries, they may be required to reach out to this particular company, this particular service. It's now on them to go through and find a way to go through and achieve what they need through other means. So with kind of setting that stage, I think it's important that we better understand what we mean when we actually say disabilities. That's going to help us better understand why this is so important to regulated businesses. I think oftentimes when people think of disabilities, you think of things like you see on this slide here. Looking on the left side, maybe a touch disability. You might be missing a limb, or an individual might be blind, or could be deaf, or they have a hearing disability. In fact, these types of disabilities all fit within general groupings that include vision, speech, hearing, cognitive, and motor control disabilities. So vision can include such things as being blind or having low vision or color blindness. Speech disabilities, which can actually include having difficulty forming words or not being able to speak at all. Hearing disabilities, such as being deaf or hard of hearing. Cognitive, this is one that is one of the far newer recognized items. This can include people that have attention deficit disorder, ADD, dyslexia, or epilepsy. And then finally, motor control, people who have no use of their hands or limited use of their hands. So at the top of this slide, we've illustrated the same disabilities we saw a couple of slides back. These are what we would actually consider to be permanent disabilities, that individual who is blind or that individual who is deaf. The full breadth of disabilities, or as we typically refer to them as disabling conditions that individuals can experience, is far more nuanced than what I think is the typical understanding of disability. Looking at this updated slide, you can actually see maybe somebody has a temporary disability. This could include an individual with an ear infection. So hearing is actually difficult for them for, maybe a few weeks or a couple of months or something like that until their ear is healed. Or it could be an arm injury. I'm going snowboarding next week. I could come back with my arm in a sling. This is a temporary disability that I'm going to experience, hopefully not, but could experience. That is going to last weeks to months for me. It is not permanent. The last category is actually a situational disability. So this could be something that lasts a few minutes to maybe an hour or two or something. This could include a bartender who's in a loud bar, lots of ambient noise, making it difficult to hear. Or it could be a new mom walking down the street holding her infant in one hand and trying to use a mobile device with one hand and trying to navigate. So knowing these conditions and kind of the variability of these conditions, it moves this a little bit more from this is a state of permanence to something that any of us can actually experience in some degree at some point, even in our day-to-day travels. All right. So we've dug a little bit deeper into the breadth of disabilities and disabling conditions. Let's look at what our target is for going through and addressing the needs of these conditions. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG, you might have heard of this referred to as the WCAG before. This is derived from a set of international standards put together by the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative. This is a global initiative that works specifically on the internet and specifically on accessibility concerns. And these WCAG guidelines aim to establish a single shared standard for making web content more accessible. Here in the US, while the WCAG is not explicitly defined by law as the standard, lawsuits often reference the WCAG as the target for accessibility requirements and remediation. We'll dig a little bit deeper into some of the legal aspects of this as we continue through the presentation. The WCAG itself is broken down into 4 principles, and these principles lay the foundation for anyone looking to engage with web content. These principles from left to right on this slide include perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. A good mnemonic way of helping to remember this is with the acronym POUR, P-O-U-R.
And so I have a couple examples here for these standards on, what does that mean for these to be applied to a website or a product. So if something is perceivable, is the contrast between your text and your background high enough to be legible for all users, and specifically for users that might have some type of vision impairment? What does it mean to be operable? Can a user easily navigate your site with only their keyboard? And these are specific examples. The actual standards are a little bit more robust than this, but just some specifics to kind of wrap your head around it. Something to make it understandable, are you using clear and jargon-free language to guide your user, not using really specialized terms that might not be obvious to a standard user? And robust, could someone whose internet speeds are lower than average still complete the primary functions on the page? So you're not required to be in an area that has very fast internet to be able to complete the task that you came there to achieve.
Awesome. Excellent examples, Allison. So taking those examples into account, within the WCAG, there's actually 3 levels of success criteria associated with each of those principles we just outlined. Looking from left to right here, there's single A, which is the minimum level of accessibility support. This is the essential stuff, the must-have, gotta do this kind of stuff. There's double A in the middle of the slide here, highlighted in blue. This is a broader target. It expands on some of those critical items that are a part of A and expands them further with additional optimizations, and is considered to be the ideal support level. And then finally, on the left side here, there's triple A. This is considered the strictest level of support and can include actually some fairly significant design and content considerations. There's really great stuff inside of AAA. It's generally not recommended for broad implementation because of how stringent some of the requirements can be, but there are some really great things you can cherry pick out of it to apply to any accessibility remediation that you're doing. And it's important to remember that these levels actually build on top of one another. So for instance, if you are to be considered AA compliant, this highlighted blue block in the middle, all the applicable success criteria that is under level A and level AA must be met. And as of the time of us giving this presentation here, WCAG version 2.1 AA has really become the prevailing standard to target. It's the standard that we at O3 target with any new projects and with any accessibility audit and remediation projects that we take on. And it's actually where over 75% of federal litigation now actually references that WCAG 2.1 AA standard.
This is also the AA standard is also what we target at Acquia for not only our products, but our marketing web pages, our internal tools and documentation. And so all of the accessibility assessments or audits that we do target these WCAG 2.1 AA standards as well. So now we're going to transition into some kind of real world examples of some organizations that are prioritizing accessibility. It's important to understand that as a B2B company, Acquia has kind of 2 layers of accessibility responsibilities. We're not only responsible for making our own products accessible, but we also want to empower our customers to provide an accessible experience for their customers. Here's some examples of a few of our customers and how they were able to achieve their accessibility goals using Acquia's products. Our first example is Princeton University. So they achieved WCAG AA compliance while driving better student outcomes for all the students, powered by Acquia and Drupal's open source community. So they're able to maintain over 280 separate sites by using an accessible platform that they can build off of. So it's kind of that foundation for them. They have reduced their legal risk by minimizing risk of security and compliance incidents with their platform-wide compliance standards. These standards, combined with the application of consistent design patterns that are used across all of their websites and all of the content, are used to enhance their brand reputation as well. The next one we have is Bayer Health. So they obviously represent kind of the healthcare sector, so a regulated industry here. And they had a big success with using a wide range or they have a wide range of brands, sites, experiences, and customer expectations that all kind of live under their single brand. But by using a common design system as the base for these sites, they could build in accessibility into the code and the design from the ground up. So any new sites, it's already built in. So every additional site can build off of that design system in a way that makes sense for that particular brand. And we'll always include the accessible features built into the core components. And the last one here, so we've covered education and healthcare. Another obvious regulated industry here is going to be government. I would guess that most of us have tried navigating a government website sometime in the recent past and ended up in a complex web or loop of pages that didn't quite get us where we needed to go. The state of Rhode Island used Drupal and Acquia to kind of move the needle for their site and create a better experience for not only their citizens, but also the employees that are tasked with creating and maintaining the various sites that go into kind of a whole government site experience. In the process, they used a tool called Lighthouse to benchmark their site accessibility and ended up with scoring between 96 and 99% on all of their pages. This is a big win for those with specific accessibility needs, as well as a significant improvement for the overall customer experience on that site as well.
Excellent. Great examples, Allison. So now that we understand, I think the disabilities that individuals can typically experience and how they apply to the WCAG, and Allison has walked us through some of the work that Acquia is doing to apply these standards to regulated industry. Let's look at a top level as far as how these considerations actually impact businesses. First things first, improving your overall customer experience. So taking accessibility into account from the start of a project results in an experience that not only provides more equal accommodation for individuals with disabilities, but as we touched on earlier, it also produces a better experience for everyone overall. This can include providing an alternative means to read content, watch media such as videos, or listen to audio, interact with different elements on the page. All of these things are critical for individuals with disabilities, but it actually optimizes and provides flexibility for all users. If we were to take a look at a couple of real-world examples, there's a few photos on this screen right now. At the left two here are a photo of a curb cut and a photo of a group of individuals crossing a street. In the physical environment, everybody takes advantage of lower curbs or these curb cuts. This is a feature that is provided specifically for disability access. But individuals, as shown in this photo here, there's a little girl on a scooter who is using the curb cut to be able to get out of the crosswalk up onto the sidewalk. And there's a man pushing a stroller behind her, and he's going to take advantage of that curb cut. So, everybody's able to take advantage of this physical space accessibility accommodation. And the same goes for digital environments. These two photos on the right here are a woman on a train and a video with captions. By providing those captions in your videos, you're providing an accessibility accommodation for individuals with hearing impairments. However, you're also providing support for an individual, in this instance, someone who may be in an environment like a noisy train, or maybe somewhere that's super quiet like a library. They're able to go through and still digest this video content without actually having to have the audio on. They're able to go through and read the captions associated with it to still get the content.
When we look at some fairly common and now really expected features of digital environments, so you think like zooming in, changing your screen brightness, tabbing between form fields, or using escape to close a window. Many users might not even know that those originated from accessibility needs, but all users benefit from that increased usability.
An additional good thing is that accessibility actually overlaps with many other practices that you and your team probably are, or at least should be, already taking into account. With regards to semantic content, your content writers, your developers, respectively, should be writing and displaying content in semantic ways using the proper HTML tags. Improving usability, your user experience team should be making the overall experience as easy and efficient as possible. Mobile optimization. Design and development should be taking into account support for various browsers and devices, specifically mobile ones where real estate and touch interactions are a little bit more challenging. And then all of these items follow search engine optimization, SEO best practices. This is something that companies are generally very invested in already, SEO. If your website meets WCAG standards, search engines will promote your site higher in the results, generating more traffic and business overall compared to your competitors. Now, I mentioned a lot of different disciplines on that previous slide: content, UX, user experience, design, development. And there's a general common misconception that accessibility is more of a technical concern, something for the development team to own. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of responsibilities that do fall to a development team, but it's important to remember that it's the responsibility of everybody to ensure that your digital property is accessible. So this chart that's on the screen right now is a little bit of a waterfall kind of representation of maybe some of the steps of putting a product or putting maybe a feature of a product out in the world: strategy, design, development, testing, release, from left to right. And what this graphic is actually representing is that the later in the process where you start taking accessibility into account, the heavier the lift it is to go through and apply that accessibility update. If you start, if you shift that accessibility discussion left, if you shift any action around accessibility left in this timeline, let's say into strategy and design, it's far easier to go through and identify and remediate these accessibility concerns than it is to go through and address them once you get into development, testing, or release. And this is also how we go through and help maybe reduce a little bit of the misconception that accessibility always takes lots of time. If you are on the back end of that of this scale, then yes, it does take a little bit more time. But if you can start shifting your perspective and addressing things earlier and distributing the responsibility, you can go through and pull back on the need and the efforts to go through and apply it. So extending your market reach. So we learned a little earlier in this presentation about those 61 million individuals with disabilities in the US. And I think what we've learned in particular over the last couple of years, the state of things these last couple of years, equal access to digital experiences, it's a critical tool of modern life. It's not really a novelty. It's not something that you can kind of skim by with. It really is instrumental to everybody's ability to go through and access, navigate, consume content. And then I think you have the added benefit of, if your company is invested in accessibility support, you're going to go through and reach the broadest group of individuals and best serve them.
And at Acquia, we have used our accessibility standards and goals to extend our market reach specifically. So when government and education sectors have stringent policies, like we've talked about, on providing accessible tools for their employees. So by conducting accessibility audits and making them available to potential customers, we increase their confidence in our products, in our brand, and yeah, open up the market to those companies or those organizations that require the products they ask their employees to use to be accessible.
Another impactful item here is actually your brand reputation. There's an enhancement that you typically experience in your brand reputation associated with this. There's a link included at the bottom of this that was shared by HubSpot, some research that they did that concluded that 9 out of 10 internet users who are blind are actually vocal anti-advocates for companies whose websites aren't accessible. And this isn't really just the individual with disability. This is really kind of the circle of people that are around them, supporting them. So their family, their friends, all of these individuals are making decisions, providing recommendations for services in solidarity with those that require the accessibility considerations. So there is a ripple effect to not going through and providing accessibility considerations that can negatively impact your brand. Now, this enhanced brand reputation can actually lead to better sales, better customer loyalty. And I think knowing this, it should really start to shift our perception that accessibility support is an extra or an add-on, something we can kind of tack on to a project and really shift it into the idea that accessibility is a key aspect of your company identity and how you support your customers. And I think in addition, you get a little bit of the added benefit of, improving and I guess, setting a better expectation internally for your diversity and inclusion efforts, which obviously has a positive impact on hiring and employee retention as well. Now, lack of accessibility support itself can affect public perception of your brand, as we've talked about, but it's even worse if litigation is involved or complaints are brought against the company. And that's going to bring us to our final impact point. Reducing your legal risk. Now, at O3, we always note the legal aspect as it relates to the business impact, but we do typically note it last, as we're doing in this presentation here. And that's because in our experience, at least, the threat of possible litigation has not been a great motivator for companies to go through and take action on this. We typically focus on all of these other impact items before having to kind of pull out the legal aspect of things. That's the trump card in the pocket, I guess, if it were. But the litigation part of it, the legal risk, is very real, and we'll definitely dig into this a little bit now. So pulling that chart that we looked at previously, that strategy, design, development, testing, release gradient chart, looking back at this, we noted the time and cost of implementing a fix after something has been released is greater than at any point in our timeline. Not only is it more timely and costly to remediate accessibility fixes later in the process, if a lawsuit is brought against your company for lack of accessibility, you now also have the legal fees and any potential settlement fees on top of this cost. So you got to fix it all, but you also now have the fees of going through and basically addressing the fact that you were caught on top of everything.
Yeah, I think it's important to clarify that even if your company or your product or your team kind of seems to be in this off-balance situation that's demonstrated by this chart, it's not too late to start shifting. Even really small changes to how you plan a project or design even the smallest component as part of your design system, those can all have a huge impact on accessibility as they accumulate.
Absolutely. Got to start somewhere. So digging a little deeper into the makeup of the legal landscape, there's another link included down here at the bottom from Accessible 360. They went through and did a little bit of research that really found that plaintiffs actually win 90% of their digital accessibility cases that make it to court, and even more above that 90% as they settle confidentially. So this is really just a note to go through and say that, yes, you can go to court, but these are pretty clear-cut cases. You either are accessible or you're not. And if they're able to go through and provide examples of how you are not accessible, it's fairly black and white. It's not something that's really fightable. You will generally be held accountable for these for this remediation. Now, in the past 15 years, the United States and a bunch of other international governments have developed various regulations around the rights of those with disabilities, specifically as it relates to certain websites, applications, digital content. Specifically looking at 2021, there were actually 2,500 digital accessibility lawsuits that were filed where the ADA, the 1990 Americans with Disability Act, was actually referenced. And this is important because Title III of the ADA references public accommodations. It does also lack technical standards, though. We're actually waiting on some 2022 numbers. There's a couple presentations that are coming up in the coming weeks where folks have kind of boiled down the 2022 numbers, and we'll actually see exactly what happens. My assumption is that that 2,500 number will go up a little bit. But there's this note that I added in here, and as far as I know, this is still the case, is that back in August, the California Court of Appeals actually ruled that websites are not public accommodations covered by Title III of the ADA. So this threw things into a little bit of a quagmire as to what is the legal landscape really look like with this? The caveat with that ruling that a lot of people ignored with it is that they appended to that they didn't feel like this was something for courts to go through and address, that they felt like there is guidelines to go through and follow, and that there should be legislation that mandates this by law. So the precedent has been set that legislation is the route to go with this. Now, in addition to the ADA, there's aspects of Section 508 and the Affordable Care Act. I think some folks know it as Obamacare. That actually applies specifically to certain healthcare and government entities. And while neither of these actually require conformance specifically with the WCAG, and they sometimes even have their own standards, it's generally accepted that by following the success criteria of the WCAG, you'll meet the necessary requirements of these various regulations that are out there. So boiling this all down here, what should you know from this? There's a lot of lawsuits that are being filed over the relationship between website accessibility and the belief that under the ADA, businesses and their websites should be regarded as a type of public accommodation and be accessible. And while there's been some back and forth within the courts around this, there's no doubts that there are standards that you can follow, and there's risk associated with not following these standards, particularly if you're in one of these regulated industries that Allison outlined, like education, healthcare, and government. It's only a matter of time until this is codified into law and there is acceptance of a single shared standard. So anything that you're doing now, even those little preliminary steps that Allison touched on, are getting you ahead of the game for when there is a very clear way of approaching litigation with regards to this. So quick, just kind of recap here. Looking back at the list of benefits we covered, your customer experience being improved, the overlap in best practices you're already following, the extending your market reach, your brand reputation and improving that, and the legal risk side of things. If you were to look at all of these outside the context of everything we've talked about today around accessibility, it really actually sounds like a lot of the basic things that most companies strive for in general as a part of their company identity. The things that they're already doing, things that they're maybe already investing money in. So why should accessibility not be included this as a part of existing and established and accepted efforts? You know, there's those 61 million individuals here in the US, there's over 1 billion people worldwide with various disabilities, and they're all looking, you know, they are customers, they are employees, and they're all looking to engage in a way that goes through and kind of accounts for equal access. And I think that by developing a long-term commitment to accessibility, your business will reach these individuals and you'll be able to provide that more equitable experience. And, you know, it's the like more kind of fluffy aspect of it. It is ultimately the right thing to do. You know, you may be that individual one day who doesn't have the equal accommodation, and it's the right thing to go through and account for the individuals now, knowing that you can also be one of those individuals in the future that experiences a disability. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for the time. It was great to be able to kind of have Allison and I walk through and establish a baseline for accessibility considerations and explore some of these benefits to your business, particularly if you're operating in one of these regulated industries, you know, education, healthcare, government. I think, Maddie, we're good to go through and use the remainder of our time today and open it up for any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a handful here. Let me see if I can bring myself back to be in the spotlight here. Awesome. Okay, so the first one, should companies in regulated industries be more cautious about using third-party accessibility widgets than other industries?
Ooh, it jumped right into the hot button topic for me. Allison, do you want to give a more measured approach reply to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you know, as part of these regulations for especially like government sites that might be using these tools, I feel, you know, as part of their process for implementing any tool, they are pretty rigorous with their assessment of them. So I think they already are a little bit more hesitant to just throw something onto their site because they do have regulations about what they need to be providing. So I'm not sure if they need to be hesitant, but they do need to be diligent in making sure it's meeting the requirements that are expected of them, and you know that all of their users and potential users are able to use that tool effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think on top of that, I think the thing that you really need to be cautious about, you know, whether you're within a regulated industry or not, when you're considering some of these tools, some of them absolutely go through and provide value. They go through and give you a little bit of a leg up, particularly if your timeline for going through and applying accessibility is a little bit more stretched out. But you need to be very cautious to not go through and kind of take the service offering that they're giving you at face value. There's a little bit of snake oil sales stuff going on with some of these accessibility services. So you really need to go through and talk about the experience that people have had with them. I think including individuals with disabilities in any discussions, if you are considering those tools, will go through and help you better understand the pros and cons of considering something like that. And it's also not an exception to, or not an exception, not a replacement for going through and putting in place your own remediation of any possible accessibility problems. It's basically a stopgap to buy you the time to get the people in place, get the training in place, and start rolling out your own updates, and get ahead of everything.
Great. Thank you, Brian. We had another one come in. What industries might require AAA compliance?
I don't know if there's I mean, I guess it would be like instances within an industry. I think if you were to look at something like if you are specifically catering to an audience that has known disabilities, that's an area where I think you'd absolutely be getting into a AAA, compliance area. I think you start getting into stuff like, more extreme healthcare examples. That's definitely AAA area. I don't believe that government or higher ed requires AAA out of the gate. Allison, are you familiar with that?
I don't believe they are. I honestly have not heard of anyone requiring AAA. Feels a little bit like the 4.5 GPA, where it's if you really want to go above and beyond, if you do want to go that extra mile, if it is because your typical customer does need more accommodations, or if if you just want to be a stronger advocate, you can do those things. But it does, it like all regulations, it does limit a little bit of what you can do from a design standpoint or a code standpoint. So we have looked at some for our products. We do not require them, but we always review them when we're doing an accessibility audit, because there's, if we can incorporate it, why not? So yeah, to answer your question, I don't know of any that have required that AAA level.
Yeah, there are those low-hanging fruit AAA items that are really just not that difficult to go through and implement. And once you've covered your A and AA items, it really is some great stuff that you can go through there and just kind of demonstrate a more proactive approach and start cherry picking some items out of the AAA criteria.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And we've got a lot of good questions coming in, so we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. This is a good question. Could any site be the target of accessibility litigation, or is it somehow limited to big sites?
No, I mean, honestly, the big sites are the ones that tend to get the most exposure. They're the ones that you kind of see written up in Forbes and all of that kind of stuff. It's, Whole Foods gets written up, Beyonce gets written up, and everything is target of litigation. Those are the ones that get the attention. But a lot of the suits are brought against like small to mid-sized businesses, because there's unfortunately a little bit of an ambulance chaser aspect of this, and it's unfortunate because I think it gives accessibility a bad name with people. If you don't have the funds to go through and go to court with it, then you settle. You still have to go through and address the accessibility items. But there's a settlement that you pay out to an individual or a law firm that brought an individual in to go through and review accessibility for the site. You see this happen a lot with like restaurants and small businesses and like mid-sized businesses and things like that. It gives things a bad name, but the truth is nobody's really exempt from it. You just hear about the bigger ones more, but everything is honestly on the table when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. How do you teach product owners to write accessibility user stories, both for new builds and remediation? Mine are hesitant to dive in and the advocacy falls on a small UX team.
Yeah, sure. I can take that. So, we are also a fairly small UX team at Acquia, and we really have been kind of the driving force behind accessibility. It does take a little bit of internal advocacy to get these ideas out there. I think the main strategy that we use is that we emphasize the fact that a lot of these enhancements that we are coming up with solutions for, issues that we're coming up with are going to solve some usability issues on top of the accessibility issues. So it's not just that, we need to meet this standard. It's we are trying to increase the user experience for everyone. So by kind of coming up from that angle, and then using our user experience skills to kind of cluster some of these into like a really tangible and really understandable piece, that it's a lot easier to fit that into a sprint or fit it into another project that's already kind of touching on a feature. And as user stories, we always try to, as we're building out user stories or like a journey map, just add in those little bits of accessibility and usability pieces along the way. And it's the more we talk about it and the more we build it into our process, the more we're talking about it with product owners, with our product managers, engineering teams, honestly, just starting the conversations and bringing it up anytime we're going through designs or research, pre-design kind of processes. It's just about kind of getting everyone comfortable with it. And it's just a lot easier to fit it in.
Great. Thank you, Allison. We can try and fit a couple more in here. Since accessibility is digital and not just the website, do you have any tips to launch the information company-wide and help people who are overworked from being overwhelmed?
Allison, I'd maybe lean on you to start on that one, since you work in kind of like a larger entity there. I'd be curious myself.
Yeah, sorry, Maddie, could you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. Since accessibility is digital and not just the website, do you have any tips to launch the information company-wide? And I think it's a two-part question, and help people who are overworked from being overwhelmed.
Okay, yeah. So we're talking about like integrating these topics into kind of every aspect of the business. I mean, it's definitely not easy. Even as an accessibility expert on the UX team, it's not always easy, and it is. Sometimes you get caught up in a design and all of a sudden you're building a prototype and you don't know, you're like, did I do my accessibility checklist? So it is kind of it can feel like another task that's added on top of, the things that you're already trying to do. And that is no different from someone on the marketing team that's trying to make accessible marketing content. So something that we've worked on is really making things like a checklist or other tools, a series of videos that might explain further. We make those really accessible. So instead of just having a checklist that sits in a Google Drive somewhere, we created a Figma component that is interactive, and you can check off your accessibility things as you go. It's built into the tool that designers are using. We build it into our project management software, where it's not something that you think at the end of the project, did I do this? It's built into the checklist. You can't move on to the next phase without seeing that. So it's just a matter of making it visible to everyone that needs to be aware, and helping them to break it down. Like what are some ways that we can integrate this into our QA process, and really just making sure everyone knows who is responsible for each piece of it. Designers have different pieces, engineers have different pieces, and there are points in those processes where it makes the most sense to fit it in. So just working with the different teams to just make sure it's visible. You're not moving on, you're not passing it off until you have checked that box for your responsibilities.
No.
Yeah, I think on O3's side, that's everything Allison said is absolutely on point. I mean, this is not a small investment of energy to go through, and kind of this is very much kind of a mentality shift for most companies, both those that are implementing and those that are providing the accessibility support. It's taken several years here at O3 to go through and evolve our practices so that the support is there for individuals to go through and feel like they know where to go for information, they know what resources are available to them. But then also, I think, to also empower individuals to go through and do this type of work, raise these types of concerns, both internally and with clients on a proactive basis. This is one of those things where we were fortunate at O3 where we kind of started a little bit guerrilla style, like a group of individuals were just kind of super passionate about accessibility, and it kind of grew into larger discussions and then an accessibility committee and really becoming a defining aspect of who O3 is. But that road was very long and there were, pitfalls and everything. There were missteps, but you continue to go through and evolve and learn and kind of fill in the gaps. And I think part of what Allison touched on was, the artifacts that you can provide, the processes that you can put in place, the educational materials that you can provide. It's also hugely important that at some point you go through and actually start to build a level of evangelism, I guess, up and down the chain, I guess, of people that are involved in these decisions. If it can't just be the designer or the developer, it needs to be the design and development lead. It needs to be the project manager that is overseeing them. It needs to be the department lead that is in charge of spending and bringing in the tools and everything and allocating time to do this documentation. And that's work that, takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of energy. It involves, getting some buy-in from various people. But that's part of the reason that I think we talk about it from this perspective, is to help people understand, like, this is the value, this is the impact of going through and doing this, investing in this, and what the long running benefit is of it for your company and for your clients.
Great. Thank you, Brian. We got a really great question here. Someone said, I'm an individual with a disability. Do you trial sites and accessibility with users who face these challenges? And he said, thank you so much for being a change agent. Brian, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I'm glad that you were able to come in and join the presentation. The reality of agency life is a little bit that, we are kind of in the constant battle to go through and educate our clients of the same information. The clients have their own priorities. We do a lot of accessibility testing, both for our existing clients as well as projects that go through and actually bring in just audit and remediation. So we may not actually be involved in the site other than accessibility review and providing feedback as to like what's going on with the site. We unfortunately have not had as many opportunities as we would like to be able to go through and work directly with users with disabilities and pair them with the client so that they can see both the defects of the site as well as the areas of the site that are excelling with accessibility. It is something that we hope to be able to go through and work a little bit more into our process and be able to make more proactive recommendations with folks, because it is a critical aspect of it. Like, it is really kind of the next step in a more mature accessibility practice, is to be able to go through and include individuals with disabilities. I myself am not, at least that I know of, do not have any disabilities. I have taken a lot of training to go through and try and understand this stuff and be able to provide as much, be as big of an advocate as I can and understand the challenges that come with it. I'll never understand the experience, but I can certainly understand the challenges of it and convey them. But I think for people to really go through and understand it, you do need people with individuals with disabilities involved.
Yeah, and I can take kind of the perspective of non-agency. We are working on really specific products that have a really specific user. So we often struggle to find people to help us test our products in general. Just because, it does require a certain level of, knowledge of Drupal and of, site hosting and, or marketing tools. So it's already kind of like our user pool for testing is already really small. And so we have attempted to, to do some of these tests with users that might have cognitive or physical disabilities. We just have not been able to kind of make that connection. So if anyone here does have some resources or some information on how we can do that, I would definitely be very interested in that, because it's something that we really want to do, but have struggled to kind of find that resource.
Great, thank you, Allison. And we have one more. And this is about specific guidelines for AAA. So they asked, do you think contrast is something that folks should aim for AAA, or are there any specific guidelines? And then another submission says examples of those low-hanging fruit would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. Most color contrast stuff falls in, well, there's color contrast levels, at least in AA and AAA. Most of what we're following is within the AA range, and that's because you do get into that area that Allison touched on, where you do have to make, maybe some significant design alterations or accommodations as it relates to color contrast, size of touch targets, things like that. They can be very challenging, especially if companies have established brand palettes and very kind of strict understandings of like how they want to be represented online. So color is actually one that as an agency, O3 has never actually had to dig into color contrast as it relates to AAA, but it is something we've worked with companies very extensively with for AA support. The challenge of it obviously being that it just requires so much change when most of these companies are well established with their palettes. Some of the things that we're actually working on pulling something in right now with most of our accessibility remediation we're doing is touch target sizing. This is one that actually is a AAA item, and it's basically going through and specifying the size of the area in which you should make clickable, either if you're in touch or mouse click. And this is actually specifically for individuals with a mobility disability or fine motor control disability. And that's one actually that has not really been too challenging to go through and implement, but is one of those quality of life optimization accessibility items that we can cherry pick out of AAA and apply with AA work that we're already doing.
Yeah, I think the color contrast one is one that often comes up as like kind of that first, first pass, like how can we make sure like it's pretty easy to build into your design system. And so that is one of those low-hanging fruit. I think a couple other ones that people maybe don't think about as often are, I can't remember the exact name of the criteria, but essentially when you're describing the next action that someone needs to take, you don't say, hit the blue button to continue. So someone might be using some type of, someone might be colorblind, or they might be using some type of assisted technology that does change their screen. So if you're using that kind of descriptive word, it's not going to be clear for that user. Even saying the button below, you have to think about someone that might be using a screen, text enlarger, and that shifts some things on the screen. It's not going to look exactly like it. So using something more like, very specific, like the continue button, saying like there's no, there will be no confusion there wherever it's placed. It's not based on the color. So yeah, that's one that we definitely do as kind of that first pass with the contrast. If we're describing something, is it going to be clear to every user? Another one that I think is really important is kind of making sure that on your page, if a user just lands on a single page, they can understand where they are in the context of your site. A lot of times, if you don't have your breadcrumbs at the top, or if the section you're in is not highlighted, there can be a lot of confusion about how they got there, how you can get back. So just making it really clear from a navigation standpoint, how you've arrived somewhere and how you can move on or go back. So those are the ones that are kind of low-hanging fruits that you can build in really easily early on. Yeah,
that directional language one, Allison, that's a challenging one. It's like harder than you think to go through.
Definitely.
Great. Well, I am just looking at the clock here and want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So you can go ahead to the last slide here, Brian. Just wanted to close this out by saying thank you for registering. Thank you for staying on. If you have any questions, feel free to either reach out to Brian, Allison, and or myself. We are happy and excited to talk more. And if we didn't answer your questions, we'll make sure to get back to you in some capacity. And thank you for joining. This was awesome.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye.